Welcome to the Inner Fire Climbing Podcast. I am Jesse Firestone. Today is the August 2025 Ask Me Anything episode. It's September 3rd. I went sport climbing this morning, and I've been going swimming every time I go sport climbing because it's so hot outside. And today I was kind of appalled to realize that after I went sport climbing, my little swimming hole was still in the shade. So it's happening, people. Fall is coming. And I'm realizing that my intro to all these AMAs are going to serve as a little bit of a marker on the calendar for what was happening with the seasons at that time. Before we jump into things, 2 quick notes. Just a reminder, these episodes are supported by my patrons. They're also supported by my clients. So if you want lots of bonus content or you want to ask questions for these AMAs, you can become a patron over at patreon.com/innerfireclimbing. If you don't want to become a patron, thanks for listening. I do just want to take a second to explain my thinking with Patreon. I don't like putting content behind a paywall. It sucks, but it's a very effective model. That's why it's so popular. My main goal as a coach is to help people. I want to improve people's performance and fulfillment, and I want to reduce suffering in the world, and putting information behind a paywall means that some people can't get to it. So that sucks, but I have to strike a balance. And the irony is the more people join Patreon, the more I can afford to focus on putting good information out on all my platforms for everyone. But nobody really wants to join unless they're going to get something for it, which also makes sense. It's kind of a tragedy of the commons. And I should also say this podcast is brought to you by Inner Fire Climbing, aka me. I don't know if you know this, listener, but I am not sponsored by a single company or entity. I pay full price for my gear and my chalk, unless my wife gets a discount for being a teacher, which she does sometimes. And while Instagram and this podcast are technically marketing, all that stuff takes place outside of the bulk of my time, which is spent coaching individual climbers. I don't have any other coaches on staff here. It's just me. If you come to work with me, you're going to work with me. So you can read more about how to do that on my website or my Instagram or by sending me a message. But thank you to all my clients. I appreciate you guys just as much as my patrons. And if you do work with me and you see that I post something on Patreon that you're keen to take a look at, feel free to send me a message and I'll make sure you can get access to it, because clients obviously help me do this too. Final prelude here. These are getting slightly more popular, so I really don't want to gate them further, but I am going to say, if you ask a whole bunch of questions, I'm probably not going to go as deep on any of the pieces of your question. I'm not going to say that you have to limit it to one question, but if you ask 5 questions, then you're going to get short answers to all of them. So if something feels extra important in your question, try to keep it narrow focused. I'm like a rocket, I'm just going to blast off into space. So give me a good guidance system and you'll get a better answer to your question. All right, let's jump in. Kenz asks or writes, I saw you were in Squamish recently. The boulders there are so beautiful. Hard agree, Kenz. I just have a question about training and trips. My partner and I are on a climbing trip in Europe and are hoping to stay 6 to 12 months. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on training while on a sport climbing trip, like do you need to at all? Or is just climbing enough to continue improving and not getting injured? Or is doing some finger training good to do? And if so, how often? Hopefully that's not too broad of a question. It is pretty broad, but I can give some general pointers here. So depending on what the life is that you lived before you went on that trip and what the life is that you're going to live after that trip, you might not want to start training. If you were doing a lot of training before you went, then you might want to keep up with some of it because number one, it's going to help you maintain that strength. It's going to help you stay healthy. And number two, it's going to ensure that you can continue training when you get back from the trip without taking a huge dip. And a lot of what I'm talking about there would be sort of classic strength stuff, like weight room stuff, to a certain extent, maybe finger strength, because some aspects of finger strength actually will detrain on a 6 to 12 month climbing trip, especially if you're sport climbing. But if your lifestyle at home isn't really super training orientated, then I definitely wouldn't start training on the trip, right? I just wouldn't make huge changes to the volume of training and climbing that you do. So if you're suddenly climbing, 3, 4, 5 days a week, and that's a lot of climbing for you compared to what you were doing before, then I definitely wouldn't do any training while you get used to that capacity. I would try to keep your relative volume of stuff that you do in a week or maybe over 2 weeks, like pretty steady if you can. But in 6 to 12 months, I kind of like to, I think I've mentioned this before, I like to think of it as just like, how many training sessions do you want to try to fit in? Like, do you want to just try to get to a weight room once a month? Because that would be 6 to 12 trips to the weight room. And that would help you maintain your basic strength pretty well. A lot of things, if you're a healthy individual, and especially if you're young, a lot of things are going to stay pretty level without needing to do any special stuff. Like just going climbing is enough to keep you relatively fit, right? You're going to do some hiking. There's always a little bit of labor involved in climbing, and your body should stay pretty strong. But it's nice to get into the gym every once in a while and do something different, in my opinion. With sport climbing, I probably wouldn't do any accessory cardio unless you're maybe, in your 40s or beyond. Stretching and cardio are probably more important as you get older, even though you're more tired and you don't want to do those things as much. As far as finger training specifically, I do think warming up and taking a little bit of very convenient finger training to near maximum is a good thing to do maybe once a week. So I like to do recruitment curls, just putting a sling around my foot and curling into the edge, and I'll take that to 85 or 90% at least once a week, pretty much year round. And I like to do that with climbing outside because it's very, very convenient. You can measure it with a Tindeck, but you don't have to. And I'll just do maybe 3 sets of 3 to 5 curls once a week. And that's like a pretty good way to just keep your fingers recruited. If you've never done that style of finger training before, then I wouldn't necessarily start doing it at that intensity or volume. I would maybe ease into it, but keep doing something similar to what you've already done before. And as far as not getting injured, I think I kind of covered that. It's like try to keep the volume as steady as you can. That's probably the main source of risk. And have fun. Man, 6 to 12 month climbing trip in Europe. Jealous. Sounds awesome. All right. Kyle asks, piggybacking off of your post about half-stepping with some word vomit, could you talk about the headspaces for a A Muerte red point, an A Muerte on-site, a tall boulder that I can take the fall, but yikes, and something like imposter syndrome where a fall looks catastrophic? How do these all differ for you? Maybe they don't. They do for me. And how do you go about cultivating that? Also, do you feel that your risk tolerance has changed at all since you have a little one on the way? So I don't think that my headspace is crazy different for those different things. I do kind of get into different visualization practices depending on how risky something is. But that's more of a natural evolution. Like as I'm trying a project, I'll start to realize that I'm, more interested in or more drawn to aspects of the visualization. And then I'll kind of start to focus on those aspects a little more. And with risky climbing, that often has to do with like developing confidence and maybe focusing more on the experience and thinking a little bit less about the nuances of the movement. As far as like, mindset going into the session, I think with hard red pointing and hard on-sighting, they have a lot of things in common. One thing they have in common is a need to make continuous progress up the wall. And so for me, like reducing stopping thoughts, having commitment cues that I can pull on, those kind of things are going to be really essential for me to keep making progress when like discomfort is setting in. And obviously the big difference is with an on-site, you don't know exactly what you're getting into, but I don't think that the headspace is really that different necessarily because I'm going to draw on the same tools, to alleviate that discomfort. I'm going to tell myself to keep going, and I'm going to go back to my breathing as sort of a baseline thing that I can use to manage my arousal level. That stuff is all pretty similar. Tall boulder that I can take the fall, but yikes, and something like imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome that Kyle's referring to is a high ball first ascent that I did. And like, I think that you could take the fall off of that, but I definitely didn't want to. And I think with risky climbing, like you're describing here, I pretty much go into it the same in terms of my headspace because I won't try something that's risky until I feel like I've done all of my practical due diligence to minimize that risk as far as I can. So in that sense, it's not like something that I'm, when you say cultivating it, like it is a very practical process for me of taking all the steps, doing all the work to make the climb as achievable and low risk as I possibly can. And then my headspace like naturally comes from the confidence that you get when you work on it enough, if that makes sense. But I do think you can draw back on some of the stuff that I talked about earlier, like commitment cues. I also think having, pre-game rituals or like a pre-flight check is really, really useful. And I should have started with this, but there's actually quite a few more posts coming on the half-stepping thing. So maybe some of the stuff in that content will be useful for you. So onto the second part of the question. Do I feel my risk tolerance has changed with a little one on the way? This is something I've been thinking about quite a lot. I've been thinking about this, even since well before we found out that we were going to have a kid. At some point, it's like I have to change some of that stuff. There's examples of people like Burns Angerl still doing pretty crazy high balls, in their 40s and 50s. But for me, the thing that I found really enchanting about high balls is that they just require a more total package. They're challenging in more ways. I think the last few years I've been a lot more drawn to pure difficulty just because I know that the clock is ticking a little bit on my ability to hit my physical limit. And so I'm kind of more interested in that right now anyway. And so it's sort of easy for me to not worry too much about whether the climbing is super risky or not. But the funny thing is actually climbing close to your physical limit is still very physically risky, just not in the same way, but if I need to take care of a kid, like tearing my labrum or something like that, or something where I need to have like an arm cast on or something where I can't use my hands, like all of those things are going to be like really, really inconvenient, needing to take care of a small child. So the risk tolerance thing is very real in my mind. And it is something that I'm definitely grappling with. One nice thing that I have there in my back pocket is that I just am not going to be doing as much climbing this fall and probably next spring. So I have a little bit of time to think about how I want to engage with that. But yeah, I found a very nice highball project last season that I think I'm at 5 days now on cleaning it. And I'm not like obsessed with the idea of doing it. I don't really know if I'll even really try to do it. It's just interesting to try it. And the whole beginning of the process is very safe. And so I've realized that I'm still interested in that, even if it's not going to be me who's eventually risking it to try to get that experience. Like if I wind up working it and making sure it's possible and breaking all the feet off and getting it really clean and dialing it and then just being like, wow, this is too scary or hard for me, and I give it away to someone else and they send it, like I'm actually still going to be incredibly psyched on that whole experience, I think. So it doesn't feel wasted at all. And I think that's something that's giving me a lot of strength to keep engaging with those things, even though they might be, more out of reach. Also sport climbing, dude. Like when done right, sport climbing, incredibly low risk. So that's been fun. But yeah, ask me again next year when I actually have seen her face. Okay, Daniel asks, when climbing with people that are better than me in the gym, how can I best learn from their climbing? What questions should I ask? How can I best take advantage of the opportunity? So observation is critical. And my first piece of advice here is going to be, like with many things in climbing, the urge is going to be to focus on the physical aspects. Why is this person, stronger on the holds than me? Why is this person able to use beta that I can't? Why are they climbing the problem faster than I? Why are they more powerful than me? It's going to be all these physical things. You're going to watch people who are better than you, and you're going to notice that physical stuff first. And that stuff does matter, but anybody who listens to me is going to know I think that stuff matters less than we think. And a lot of the reason that I would encourage you not to focus on that stuff is because the people that are really, really good at climbing are going to have a lot to teach you by what they're doing off the wall. What's hard is you can't tell what's going on in their head when they're not climbing. So all the questions that I would encourage you to ask people, if you feel comfortable with them, I mean, that's step one, is to get over the social hurdle. But I would just talk to them about their process. If somebody's really crushing it in the gym, talk to them about what they're thinking about and what pieces of the climbs they're focusing on when they do fall and they're, looking at something or thinking about something. Ask them, what they're thinking about. And I think why questions are always really interesting too. Like if they're focused on one move, like why are they focused on that move? And the funny thing is going to be climbing is such a felt and intuitive thing. A lot of people are not going to have good answers to these questions. Some of the most sort of quote natural climbers really are just not going to have a solid understanding of their process at all. But sometimes you can still draw a little bit of wisdom out of them just by getting them to talk about it. And they might learn something about that too. Really, I think the hardest part and the most important thing to get over is just to actually engage with them and talk to them. Because the coolest thing would be if you wind up developing like a friendship or a relationship with that person. That's the long-term way to benefit from having a strong climber a stronger, like better climber in your life is going to be to, develop a relationship with them and be able to ask them questions in the long term. But if you just get one session with them, I would just make sure you talk to them, ask them what they're thinking about and what they're focusing on and see what they say. As far as how can I best take advantage of the opportunity, I would focus less on that part and just focus on being present with your climbing experience with this other person there. I wouldn't come at it from a perspective of like, how can you benefit from them? Even though I just gave you a bunch of tips on how you can benefit from them, because I think if you're overtly like, ooh, strong climber, how can I use this to my advantage? I think people can kind of tell. I'll say one other thing on this, because I think it's an interesting story. I have a really good climbing buddy who I've been climbing with for probably 12 or 13 years. And after we've been climbing together, we just met in the gym one day. We were just climbing and we were like, oh, you want to try this, like whatever together? We're like, sure. We became really good buddies and we've climbed like all over the west half of the US and had lots of good climbing experiences together. And like a few years into climbing together, he told me that he had watched me climb at the gym several days before he decided to ask me to climb with him. He basically told me he was like admiring my style, and it turned into one of the most productive climbing friendships as far as like, taking advantage of the other person, but also he's one of my best friends. And yeah, that's just at some point we were strangers to each other and we both were like, oh, maybe I could like learn something from this guy. And now we're buddies. So all your climbing friends were that way at one point, which is cool. All right. Case asks, what's in your shoe quiver for outdoor climbing? I'm less interested in specific models than the features you turn to, such as soft versus hard, how you match shoes to climbs, and finding potential excuses for why I can't climb fat slab unrelated to skill. So fat slab is hard, and it's definitely your shoes. I just want to encourage you there. As far as what's in my shoe quiver, my strategy right now is I usually take one or two pairs to the crag, depending on what I'm doing that day. And that's almost always going to be my go-to shoe or the lace-up version of my go-to shoe. And basically, I just do that because I find the lace-ups to be, I think I just talked about this last month, but I find the lace-ups to be more comfortable for wearing for a long time because they support my foot a little better. But otherwise, the shoes perform very similarly. And so how I match shoes to climbs in general is I pull from my quiver of shoes that I have in the truck and I try to find the best shoe for whatever the thing is that I'm projecting. And then I keep projecting it. And at some point, 3 to 10 days into the process, I realize that I can actually do all the same stuff with my go-to shoe. But I have to use the other shoes to learn the moves, if that makes sense. Like the only things that this hasn't been true on have been climbs maybe really close to my limit, like V11 and up, and mostly on the V13s that I've tried, where I've felt like I really actually could only do the moves with a certain shoe. And for me, climbing in Leavenworth, that is always related to the heel on the shoe. I mean, heel hooking is just so important here in Levy, and like people might not like this, but I think most of the feet in Levy are actually jugs. It's very rare to have bad feet here, like truly bad feet. Like if you can relax into the position and drop your heel, almost all the footholds are jugs. There's things like Angelina Jolie where that's obviously not true. But actually, even Angelina Jolie is a perfect example of I spent days and days trying different shoes for those really terrible, tiny little smedges, and I wound up just wearing my go-to shoes when I sent it. So I kind of don't match shoes to climbs. I just learned the climb well enough and then realized that the shoe that I am the most skilled with is the appropriate one for me to wear once I know the climb well enough. So I don't know if that's the strategy for everybody. That works pretty well for me. Also, context for anyone who doesn't know, I'm on the taller side, so I can dorsiflex quite a lot. I don't need to plantar flex as much even when I'm standing on an edge, so I tend to treat most footholds like smears, which I think is part of the reason that I can get away with wearing semi-soft shoes and not that aggressive of shoes. I think the only real edge cases that matter for me are how the heel fits and whether or not it deforms. Those tend to be the things that matter the most. So what I mean by deform is like if the heel is stiffer and it fits your foot more tightly, then when you heel hook with it, you're going to get a contact patch that doesn't change. And if the shoe is a little softer or doesn't fit your heel as well, then when you heel hook and put a ton of weight on it, the shoe is going to deform. It's going to kind of squish out to the sides, and you're going to get a bigger contact patch, but it's also that increased pressure is going to make it more likely that the shoe is going to come off your heel, or that your foot is going to move inside the shoe, or that your heel is going to slip. And like sometimes that deforming and increased contact patch size can be really useful if the heel hook is kind of good. But if the heel hook is bad and you need to put a lot of weight on it, or if you're heel hooking like a specific little grain or like chunk of grains, then having something that's not going to deform is way more important. And in that case, I almost always go for one of two lace-ups, either the Neutro lace-ups from UP or the Serious lace-ups from UP, basically because they're like I don't know the shoe terminology, but they're, one-piece unibody shoe. So I can feel that they're stiff through the entire body of the shoe. And they're also lace-ups, so I can lace them in a way that I feel like my heel is like pulled against the bulk of my foot a little bit better. And those two shoes have been the only ones that I'm able to get certain crux moves to work. Like if I put that much weight on a heel hook with softer shoe, it just wants to come off my foot. That's the biggest limiting factor for me. As far as like edges and stuff, most of the time it's for me more about learning the body position and trusting the foot, and doesn't actually matter that much. Final thing on this, when I used to climb at Smith Rock, I did really feel that stiffer shoes were a lot more important. But with the climbing that I do now, my personal shoe quiver, it doesn't seem to matter all that much. I will whip out the stiff shoes occasionally, especially for sport climbing and trad climbing, and just kind of try to remember how to climb in them. And I'm always pleasantly surprised at how they feel compared to back in the day. I think just because I climb better on granite than I did on tough. So good luck with Fat Slab. Hope that helps. Okay, Simon says, some boulders offer different macro betas with different moves using different holds or the same holds in different combinations. When approaching such a boulder during your initial discovery phase, how do you trade off between exploring the different macro betas on offer versus deep diving on a particular move? I love this question. It's a great question. Back in the day, the way that you would engage with the climb was you would just walk up to it and start seeing what jumped out at you, because you actually wouldn't know what the different macro betas were. And so I'm really lucky because I developed my bouldering style in an era when I wasn't tempted to know so much about a boulder before I showed up to it. And while that was very frustrating, and I spent many, many, many days not doing things that I considered to be like, easy for me or things I should do, I developed a really solid understanding of what to do to solve problems, and like the core principles, not to, sound like I'm marketing my course, but the core principles that are really important for solving a problem. That's literally why I named my course that, because I think that if you have some kind of first principles that you can fall back on, it's a lot easier to follow your gut and do something that you think is going to make sense. There's like a logic to problem solving that I think is really, really valuable in this discussion. Like one example would be if you're working a boulder and you pull on partway through and then you top it out from there, you can wind up with this like red herring scenario where you can't climb into the position that you started from. And so you want to be smart about what links you try and what sequences you're going to try to prove. So if you have an idea, you want to think through the logic of like, can I actually connect this idea that I have to the rest of my sequence or to some other theoretical sequence? The harder the climbing gets, the more difficult it is to go through that logic in an abstract way, and you do wind up having to actually pull onto the boulder and figure all that stuff out. But I think it is important to try to develop that logic. The counterexample would be the worst thing I think you could do would be to go to the boulder and just think like, I have beta A that this person did, and I have beta B that this person did, and I'm either going to do one of these two things. So if you are the sort of person who wants to use video beta, wants to know everything about the climb before you show up, that's okay. I think there are long-term ramifications of that, but I'm not like opposed to it because people are busy, and in a lot of cases, video beta can help you have a less frustrating experience, and that's a good thing. That's like, more fulfilling. If you don't have a lot of time to spend at the boulder, that's a good thing. But if you are that type of person, it's that much more important that you not get fixated or think that, because you showed up with that video, that it's the only way that you can do it. That's the really important thing. So now that I've gotten on my soapbox for 5 minutes, me personally, how do I trade off between exploring different macro betas on offer versus deep diving on a particular move? I've made some posts on Instagram. You can scroll through my Instagram and find a post that's like different ways to work boulder problems, where I kind of run through the different heuristics. I don't literally draw from that list of heuristics, but I'm usually, when I reflect on my projecting processes that I've had, I'm usually using one of the ones that I put in that post. So that would be like working crux out, working top down. Those are probably the two that I use the most often. So top down would be like, I figure out the top of the boulder first from some logical position that I'm sure I can climb into. And then I'm going to get that part dialed, and then I'm going to try to do the move before it, and then the move before that, and then the move before that, trying to basically logic my way backwards so that I know that I don't climb myself into a dead end. That's a top down. And then crux out is kind of the same thing, but that's usually if the crux is like visibly harder when I show up to the boulder. I'm like, whoa, this part looks hard, or I know that part's notorious. Then I'm going to put a lot of effort into that part, and I'm going to also think about the beginning and end kind of separately, but I'm usually going to work out from the crux and probably focus a lot of effort on the crux itself. So I don't know if that's too general of an answer, but let me see if I can very briefly summarize. Don't use so many performance enhancing tools that you stop yourself from developing the intuition of what to work on, and recognize that that is going to be a frustrating process, and you're going to make big mistakes sometimes that cost you the send. And you may even sometimes feel like you could have avoided that by having more video beta downloaded. There's going to be a day where you want to climb something and there's not a beta to download. And so that's a trap. That's key takeaway number one. Key takeaway number two, focus on the first principles of the problem that you're trying to solve. I'll plug my course here if you haven't already seen it. If you're listening to this, Principles of Problem Solving, I think it's pretty valuable for understanding what the most important pieces of solving boulder problems are. Number three, there is an internal logic to finding good sequences. So just paying attention to whether or not it makes logical sense to do the link or sequence that you're doing. Well, I'll throw in one bonus tip too that's sort of tangentially related to this. I always link, when I'm first working a boulder problem, I always link all the foot moves into whatever the hand move is that I'm going to try. So if there's like 3 setup moves with the feet and then you do a hand move, I'm going to start with my feet all the way down, and I'm going to do all those foot moves every time I try that hand move, because that's the best way, in my opinion, to make sure that the way you're holding the holds when you set up for the hand move is going to be the same as the way that you climb into it. Because as your hips and center of mass move upwards or outwards on the holds, that's when you're going to feel like you need to adjust on them. So you'll learn a lot about how to hold the holds if you always add the foot moves. Plus then obviously you're getting more experience on the foot moves. You're getting more time under tension on the hand holds. It's a really good way to work a boulder or a route. All right. Jantina asks, following up on my question last month about how much climbing shoes matter, my question for this month is about how much climbing chalk matters. My usual chalk was recently discontinued, so I'm experimenting with other options for the first time, and there are so many different brands and types of chalk available. There seems to be a broad spectrum from fine powder to super chunky. Some types of chalk have additives like drying agents and other stuff I don't understand, and the texture and friction and feel of different chalk varies a lot. And of course, there's a variety of liquid chalk available as well. So how much does the specific brand and type of chalk actually matter for friction and climbing performance? What features of chalk make the biggest difference? What other advice do you have regarding chalk? Such a good question. Okay. It's funny, I'm such a maximalist. I'm the guy that takes like tons of stuff to the crag, and I love having all the widgets, and I like to have every tool available. But the two big deep dives we've done on gear in the last 2 AMA podcasts, I've just been like, it's not that big of a deal. Because truthfully, I don't think the chalk matters that much. Maybe it's like 1% of performance or something like that. Assuming, that it's within the bell curve, like it's not the worst chalk for you and it's not the absolute best chalk for you. It's probably like 1%. But 1% can be a lot if it's really frictiony climbing. So, all right, I'll tell you what I know about chalk. But I think the most important takeaway is it's probably not the thing that's preventing you from sending your project. And changing your chalk probably isn't going to make you send your project. And if it does, I want to know what else is going on, or I want to know what brand of chalk you're using before so I can avoid it. For me, as far as the types and feel of different chalk, I have really dry hands. Personally, I do not like the chalk that feels very, it's like so powdery that it feels wet. I really don't like that stuff. I can't tell you a brand, but I know that several brands have that kind of feel to them. I just intuitively do not like that. I have used it before and I can climb okay with it once it like settles on my hand, but I just don't like the feeling of reaching into a chalk bag and having it be so fine that it's like wet feeling. Personally, I don't like that. I also don't like drying agents. So Metolia Super Chalk, I don't want that in my chalk bag because my hands are plenty dry enough. I don't want any weird stuff. And I can't authoritatively say that that stuff is not bad for the rock. I mean, can't authoritatively say that chalk isn't bad for the rock either. I also think some chalk, even dry chalk, has like rosin and other things like that, like the tree sap stuff in it. I would avoid that stuff. It's definitely bad for the rock. So that's something I know. As far as the texture of like fine powder to super chunky, I think it's kind of about your preference. I like to get a sort of chunky chalk so that I have some chunks. It's very convenient for ticking. From a tactile point of view, when I reach in my chalk bag, it just feels nice to have something there. But that's probably like almost entirely preference. There's also chalks that have like a smell, which can be interesting at first, but it's actually a really powerful psychological arousal mechanism to have your chalk have a scent. Like I've known several different people in the past who are actually scent their chalk bag deliberately. And then when they're, on a sport climb at a rest and they're chalking up, they're smelling that scent that they put in there, and it's like helping them stay in the zone. I've also known people who put like river rocks in their chalk bag for the same reason. Just something to touch while you're chalking up to kind of reset you. So yeah, I'd go by feel and I would go by your rituals, and I would find something that works for you and is relatively cost effective. For the last good chunk of years, I have used black diamond, white gold for my dry chalk. I think we get some kind of discount for my wife being a teacher, and we just buy it in bulk every year. And I like it. It's pretty good. It's fine. It's in the bell curve for me. I actually do think, even though people made fun of it when it was new on the scene, but it's been around for a long time, the Friction Labs chalk, I actually do think it's probably a little bit better than white gold, but it's not enough better for me to care to pay more for it personally. I just don't think it makes that big of a difference. Yeah, final thing, liquid chalk I think is just going to be the same process of trying different things and sort of seeing what works for you. I've had a little bit more, let me think here. I'm more amenable to different liquid chalks than I am to different powder chalks. Like I haven't tried a liquid chalk yet that I was like a hard no on, whereas with the dry chalk, the really powdery stuff, I'm a hard no. So I don't know if that means that liquid chalk is just more similar. Some people also make their own liquid chalk. I think that's actually pretty easy to do. The brand I like right now for liquid chalk is Midnight Lightning, and half the reason I like it is it just has a really nice smell when you put it on. I don't know that it's doing anything for my performance like I was saying earlier, but I just like the way it smells, and that's fine. It's summer, so I'm using liquid chalk quite a lot. So what other advice do you have regarding chalk? Have a refill bag of chalk in your crag pack if you're sport climbing, because it really sucks to run out, and I feel like I run out a lot less with my bouldering bucket than I do with my sport climbing chalk bag. And other chalk advice. Brush the holds, dude. That's my biggest advice related to chalk. The holds are gross out there. All right, I hope that was helpful. Okay, Jake asks, fall season, aka performance season here in Washington, is right around the corner. I'm in the middle of a training block where I'm exerting lots of energy and building up fatigue as I adapt my body towards training stimulus. The goal is to train with minimal risk until fall and then switch goals towards more performance. However, there's still some boulders in Squamish and other local areas I'd like to try that are near limit and easy to access during summer months. How do you recommend going about balancing training goals versus performance goals, especially when in the middle of a training block? Is it okay in certain circumstances to still try hard outdoors while training hard? So yeah, it's okay in certain circumstances to still try hard, but you just have to recognize that there's a cap to how much your body can tolerate, and everything is going to push you towards that cap. And if you go beyond the cap, that's when you start to have consequences. So you can do both of those things, but you can't indefinitely do both of those things without taking on some risk. So you have to choose, like, is the purpose of training to really try to break through and get some physical adaptation, in which case you got to let go of a little bit of that outdoor projecting? Or are you just kind of lackadaisical about your training? It's a fun thing for you to do, but you're not worried about maximizing your gains. And that's totally fair, by the way. In which case, maybe performing a little bit during the summer is nice. Like, I like performance climbing and projecting stuff. I like the act of doing that. And so my training probably always, quote, suffers a little bit. But, for any thing that you lose in your training there, you're gaining something in your climbing because you're spending more time learning to deal with different climbing situations. You're getting to climb on more different terrain and stuff. And those things all have a really profound impact on your experience, and like building up your sort of library of stuff that you can handle. Like sometimes it's going to be fall or spring and it's going to be a little too warm, and having climbed in summer may give you access to some tactics and tricks that other people don't have, or that you wouldn't have if you hadn't gone out a little bit during summer. That's just an example of like an advantage that you could get from it, right? So I think the important thing is to just have the conversation with yourself about where your true priorities lie. And if you find yourself checking the weather over and over and over and thinking about going outside to some local projects, like that's a revealed preference showing up. That's something in your mind being like, this is something I want to do, The other thing maybe we're saying is like, it's also okay to keep going outside and trying local stuff or going to Squamish and just having fun. You don't have to try at your limit. You don't have to climb for 10 hours every day. You can just go do those things and enjoy being outside. That's kind of more like what I've been doing this summer. I haven't been like raging on limit stuff. I've just been enjoying the days as they come. Summer is a much hated season for climbing, but one thing that's really cool about summer is the days are so long. You can just do lots of stuff. I can go climbing and do a bunch of training in the gym and still work a full day that day and go to bed like at a reasonable hour. And it's just much harder to do when the sunlight goes away, to like squeeze all that stuff in. So summer has its upshots. One way that I've thought about balancing training goals and performance goals that might be useful is just thinking about like, what is the thing I'm willing to sacrifice, and just having that be a dial that flips. It's like during a training block, I'm sacrificing pure performance. During a performance season, I'm sacrificing a little bit of strength gains and a little bit of consistency and stability, I'm taking on a little bit more risk. And I just think of it as like a flip-flop. It's like the switch is flipped one way or the other. Like if I'm really training hard, then I know that I'm giving up a little bit of performance. And I just think of that as like a switch that I've flipped in my mind so that I can focus on the training. Like I said earlier, sometimes it's a little bit more in the middle. It's not a literal switch flip, but if you're the kind of person who does better focusing on one or the other, then the switch flip mentality might be helpful. Okay, Fu asks, philosophical question. Do you think a climb, boulder, or route should last forever? One of the main reasons I'm drawn to board climbing is because problems in indoor gyms get constantly reset. Every commercial gym I've been to runs like clockwork. Once the schedule is up, a section gets reset, and the project I've been investing multiple sessions into is gone forever. That exact climb will never exist again. On top of that, there's always the pressure of time before the next reset. Gyms do this for commercial reasons and because of limited space. Outdoor climbs also have a time limit, but usually a much longer one. Real rock changes slowly through broken holds, polish, or even landslides. So how do you feel about the idea of someone or something taking away the opportunity for climbers to return stronger or for new climbers to experience and attempt a problem? Well, there's two different questions in here. The way the last question is phrased, how do I feel about someone or something taking away the opportunity? That makes it sound like it's about chipping or people putting oil on holds and things like that, which obviously I feel really bad about those things. And people should not do that. But as far as route setters stripping the routes and resetting, it makes sense. Like you said, from a commercial incentive point of view, they have to do that. That's the product. And from a board climbing perspective, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. That's one of the best things about a board. I can see why that draws you to board climbing. But I guess my counterpoint would be, you're thinking about the opportunity to climb it going away at the end of that phase. But to me, I think about it as you have an opportunity to climb it during the amount of time that you have. And so what you like about board climbing is it's giving you this sense of abundance. It's giving you this sense that the runway is really long. You have lots and lots of time to do the thing that you want to do, and so the opportunity feels infinite. I hate to break it to you, the opportunity is not infinite. It is very, very long, but there's going to be a point in time where you can't climb on a board anymore, whether something changes in life or you just keep doing what you're doing for a long time. Maybe you get disinterested in it, or maybe you stay interested in it until you just can't do it anymore, which for everyone, no matter how genetically gifted, is eventually going to be a thing. So you asked a philosophical question, I'm giving you a philosophical answer. I think you have to respect that it's always limited. And I think it helps to switch your mindset from one of this thing is being taken away or it's something I can't have, to being, all right, I have this opportunity. They have set these climbs for me. I have this much time to do them. And yeah, they're going to go away. So I have to make the best of this opportunity that I can. The reason that I think that that's really valuable is because you're always actually on the clock like that. And that's one thing about climbing in the gym that I actually think is really, really useful, is people who actually climb the sets in the gym and people, especially people who go back to climbs in the sets and like put multiple sessions into things. I think they're kind of getting the best out of the gyms. I know it's really popular to just climb on whatever's new and like try to flash stuff or try to do it that day and then move on to the next thing. I think that's really fun too. But I think going back and re-engaging with it and having a deadline or like a timeline that you have to do it on is actually super valuable, because you're going to develop this late stage projecting like mindset and late stage projecting tactics that you can't develop if you always have plenty of goes and plenty of time. The corollary for people who climb outside is if you have a lot of climbing around you, it can be really nice to have this feeling of abundance, like, I didn't do it today, whatever, I'll come back Tuesday, it's fine. But then you go on a trip and you can't come back Tuesday. You actually have to fucking do it right now. And that's a big switch flip. And so you need experience with both of those things if you want to do well in both of those situations. And so I think it's great that you're drawn to board climbing and you recognize the benefits of board climbing, but there are upshots to those other types of climbing that are limited. even if they don't last forever. Actually, the fact that they don't last forever is kind of what the upshots come from, if that makes sense. So, no, I don't think climbs should last forever. I think they're made more precious by the fact that they don't. Yo, Collin, thanks for joining me.
Yo, for anyone that's watching this, I'm going full MC style. I'm going handheld mic. Hopefully it's nice.
So I brought you on because I got a question that has some physiology in it, and I think you're a little bit more of an expert with the physiology than me. So actually, why don't you just briefly tell people what you do and how we know each other?
Sure. Yeah, we get stuck on a meeting together like twice a month and have to look at him and this other weird dude that has more tattoos than I do that I'm jealous of. But I am also a Camp 4 human performance coach alongside Jesse, and we were brought together under that awesome team. And so I've been coaching rock climbing from primarily the strength and conditioning side for maybe more than 5 or 6 years now. So kind of a new baby. And then I've been in the strength and conditioning field for almost 9, maybe 10 years now. So I'm getting to that scary moment where I have to use double digits in my coaching. And I still feel like a baby, and which is kind of the Dunning-Kruger effect is very real at this point, where I'm hitting my like 9-10 year mark. And I'm like, wow, it feels like year one, but a little bit more confident in my simplicity. And slowly getting into like the climbing skills and movement application side, which I have been blessed and honored to be by your presence and learn a lot from you. And so it's all, I think, slowly starting to come together and blend in really well. But yeah, I feel like we form a really good team at the Camp 4. We have a lot of different specialties, but then we all cover the same common generality, and it really helps.
Cool. So I'm hoping that we can draw on some of I know you teach the Camp 4 certification, and when I did the certification back in the day, I remember going through some forum physiology stuff and using these Moxie monitors. And before I dive into any more context, let's read the question. That'll help it make more sense. So there's this 2-part question. This question's from Brian. First part, he says, how do you know how long to rest en route? I've heard it said it's when you're no longer recovering, but actually starting to lose. I imagine a curve going up and then going down, and the point just before it goes down is when you leave the rest. But how do I make this actionable? That's the first part. I think I can probably answer that part. The second part of the question is, further, I have trouble understanding the physiology of this. Like, you're pumped, you get to a rest, then it gets better, then it gets worse. If it'll eventually get worse, why does it get better at first? I feel like this is a dumb question, but I'm having trouble with it and feel like understanding what's going on inside the body or cells would help. So maybe I'll just try to answer the first question. So how long to rest is basically, I feel like if it's a really hard, super pumpy route, I have to practice it a little bit and kind of feel out where to rest. And when I'm red pointing, I'm of the archetype where I tend to rest less and less and less as I'm getting better on the route, because I'm getting faster, I'm getting more efficient. And resting actually becomes sort of superfluous. But there are other people who their superpower is resting, and they're going to rest a ton even on red points. So I think it's a very intuitive sort of felt thing. And then how to make that actionable becomes really complicated. But I think for me, it feels a lot like, you have different red point goes where you rest a little more or a little less, and you sort of have to try to zero in on what the right amount is. But yeah, you might want to just know about yourself, whether you're like a person who really can rest or not, and then base your assumptions off of that. Like if I'm not leaving, if I sit there and shake and I'm not leaving it feeling obviously better than I was when I got to it, I'm probably not going to rest for as long at that spot. And like my explain like I'm 5 version of that is I get to the rest and then I stay there until my heart rate comes down if it's good enough, if it's a good enough rest. And I think what's happening is my muscles don't have enough oxygen, and it takes time for my heart to get that oxygen to my muscles, and my heart rate's not going to slow down until it's kind of replenished that oxygen, which I don't even know if that's explained like I'm 5. That might be explained like I'm 10. But what do you think, Collin? How far off am I?
No, that was good. That's funny. The 5-year-old may be like, when you can't breathe anymore, bad. And I heard this question, and I thought of a story of my very first 512. And It is this route that is broken up into two halves. It's a 10 plus that goes into like a V45. And right at the halfway point, about 3/4 up the wall, there is this, what I like to call the Godzilla flake. And if there's any Godzilla fans out there, they have the big fins on the back. And it's just this jaggedy, and you could like put your hands in one of those things and kind of hang out there. There's a slot behind for your fingers to go, but it's not like a finger crack. So it's a jug-ish, but it's sharp. And it hurts. And there's not a lot of great places to throw a knee bar or a heel. And the word of mouth at the crag is always rest there. You rest, you get it back, and then that's how you send this climb. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to listen to everyone else. And I do that. And I would hang out there for 2 minutes and 5 minutes and 10 minutes. I would never improve. I'm like, I'm confused. And so one day I was like, screw it. I'm going to go straight through. And I actually got one move higher. And this was like very close, like within a week, not like 2 years later. And so I was like, maybe the way I climb this is going to be different than other people, right? Kind of a weird aha moment.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to what you said is, I think the most practical takeaway when it comes to resting is you really have to play around and see what works for you, because principally you have to understand, unless it's like a knee bar or a bat hang and your hands are completely off, I think there's always going to be some level of fatigue accumulation. It might be a trickle in, and the rest might be taken away out, and the ratio might play in your favor. But there's always that whether it's like you're psyching yourself up because you're thinking about the scary crux, or the pain of the hold, or the skin is going away. So there's always a little bit of something. But your hope when you do rest is that the rest outweighs what you're getting. So it definitely comes into the uniqueness of the hold you're on, the body, how much is on your hands, and so forth. You touched on some cool practical takeaways, too, when it comes to perception of your heart rate and your breathing. And so that's a good play, because you said, well, do maybe a big toe into the water of what's going on. Diving into the deep end, there's a shit ton of things going on. Sorry if I can't curse. But there's so many factors influencing when your body goes, nope, I'm done, and falls off. But the generalized one is I like to analogize the car and a tank of gas. So you show up to the bottom of the route, you have X amount of fuel in your tank, you climb up, and then when it hits, quote unquote, zero, you fall off. A really good warm-up will help you kind of build and add in some more gas before you hop on. And then let's say you're climbing to that rest point, maybe you're at a quarter tank. Again, the goal of that is, okay, maybe you've got a little pinhole in the gas tank, but the hope is that you're filling in more than the pinhole. And so what that is this oxygen, which is the currency of your energy. No matter if you're bouldering really hard or climbing a multi-pitch, oxygen and the way blood flows through your body is going to be the main currency of energy exchange, at least fundamentally. And then the ratios of, all those big words like anaerobic, alactic, blah, 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 that confuse everyone with energy systems. They come into play too. But the goal is, how do we get that gas tank to slowly fill up a little bit? And that is, everyone has a certain threshold where if I can take a lot of weight off my fingers, it should all come back. Imagine not climbing.
If you're standing on the ground.
If you're standing on the ground,
come back. Yeah.
Coming right back. But for some of us, a jug, and maybe I define a jug like a big old handlebar, that might be enough to take off your fingertips. But for some of us, maybe the newer climbers, that might still be stressful. You might have to throw an elbow through that thing to literally take your fingers off. Or one of my favorites is you get on a ledge with your forearm and you just alleviate the fingers. And now I'm sending some pump to my chest. And I'm like, oh, God, now my chest hurts. However, like the person alluded to, the curve will come back in your favor, but then maybe not so much to where you want it to be. And as soon as you start climbing, you might fall off again and kind of go quicker like that. So the goal is, how do we understand that rest in particular and what it is relative to my intensity? If it's standing on the ground level, absolutely rest it. 10 out of 10 rest. If it's anywhere in the middle, I think we have to go back to the practical coach takeaways, and now we have to play around. And can we get creative with like a heel hook or a knee bar, or find a way to make it feel like standing on the ground? If not, practice resting like 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, maybe up to 10 minutes. And do any of those iterations change? If not, maybe don't rest, because any amount of rest is also more time on your body, on your system, on your fingers. Yeah. And again, it still kind of takes away. So I think that's how I would open up the conversation with that.
That makes sense. I think one thing you kind of briefly touched on there is like when you were talking about using a heel hook or a knee bar or something like that. Basically, what it comes down to in climbing is like, again, and you're here to tell me if I'm wrong about this, it's the occlusion that happens in the forearm while you're climbing that's preventing oxygen from getting into the muscles of the forearm. And like most of the rest of your muscles are big enough and have enough blood flow that they can keep getting oxygenated while you're climbing. But because we're constantly on our fingers, we can't get the blood flow into our forearm muscles in order to keep that muscle oxygenated. So even though you could be in a really strenuous rest with like a knee bar or something like that, but generally the muscles that hold you on in a knee bar, or if you're doing like a heel hook, like your hamstring, those are just bigger muscles. They're not as likely to get occluded. And so it's easier to maintain the demand for oxygen, those bigger muscles. And if you're doing that, in theory, your forearms could be depumping. But I want to talk about what depumping actually is. And one sec before we get to that, I think that you mentioned, finding those other tricks or maybe putting your forearm on or whatever. But the other thing I found really useful is just changing your grip. So like if I'm doing a lot of crimping, I'll often get to a rest and I'll be very like draggy and open. But if I'm doing a lot of like sloper climbing and I get to a rest, I've found that like being a little more active with my grip and actually like relaxing my hand can be a little bit more helpful, like being more on my fingers. And I have memories of like Full Heinous at Smith Rock is a good example, where you get to like a Waco, you're way up off the ground, you have like one more boulder problem to do, and in this Waco, it's got a bunch of flat spots that you can grab that are not really that good for being above your bolt and way up off the ground, but way over on one side of the Waco, there's a constriction, and so you can put your hand on that side. And I found that if I just put way too much tape on my pinky, I could just lock the tape in the constriction, and I was like hanging on my arm still, and it was only that arm that I could do that with, so my other hand still had to hold the hold. But just locking my pinky like that allowed me to like relax my muscles quite a lot and actually like depump a little bit there. And actually that wound up being pretty essential beta. So sometimes you can just play with your actual grip too. It doesn't have to be like other parts of your body. But when we talk about depumping, whether that's like shaking out or being at an actual rest or standing on the ground, can you tell us like what that actually is?
Sure. And you mentioned it really well. So basically, if you imagine like a fire hose or a hose at all, and water is trying to come through this thing, that water is like your blood flow. And the goal is to get water from the source to your muscles so that they can do work. Mm-hmm. When we are on our fingers, because the muscle groups are so small relative to like your quads or your butt or your chest, it doesn't take a ton of relative effort on the wall to actually get them to basically have so much compression around that hose that water gets really hard to go through. And so now the body has to be really good at taking whatever water it has access to and turning it into energy. And this is where maybe a little deeper, like the genetic ability of where how much oxygen you can carry per genetics and all that really come into play. Because some people can get heinously pumped and they can last like another 20 meters. And you're like, how the hell did they just do that? And that's why like doping in other sports, like endurance sports, is amazing, because per red blood cell, I'm bringing in a whole day's worth of energy, where the normal person is done after a little bit. So that's besides the point. And so how do we depump is step one is reduce the compression around that hose. And so that's why getting to on the ground and standing and having no hands on the rock, great. Or can I throw a heel? Can I get a knee bar? Can I bat hang and get my hands off that? Or like you said, can I change my grip? I like what
even just being on a jug versus being on a crimp. Like if you're on a crimp, you're probably using more muscle fibers, so it's more constricted, right?
Right, 100%. I think back to the way I climb too is sometimes I'll get to a spot and it's very, let's say, four-fingery, and I'm very on my four fingers. I'll find a way to like get my thumb more involved and almost like close my eyes at points and like, how much can I let go of the other four fingers while still not falling? Mm-hmm. And even those little things to take it off can help deconstrict that hose, and get some more blood flow back in. And touching back to like the breathing aspect, which is very cool, is that when you climb, aside from it being scary and above a bolt, like your heart rate's going to increase. It's not necessarily cardiovascular. And this can go back to maybe the climbing community or general community's idea, like, oh, it's such a good workout. Like my heart rate goes up. I'm like, no. But when we do constrict that hose and not allow blood flow to go, your brain's like, uh-oh, something, we need more. And it sends more water, so it turns up the tanks. That is your heart rate going up to try and make up for the lack of flow going on. And that's what we really feel, like, oh, God, here it is. And that backup and the stuff that's in the middle is also going to accumulate. So the pressure, the tension in the muscles, we're accumulating not only the lack or the time with lack of oxygen or lack of energy, but the muscle strain and the tissue strain, all of what we'll call the extra metabolite accumulation, the acid, right? It's like the lactate, like, oh no, the lactic acid. That's actually a okay thing. It's the acidity of the surrounding area.
Acidosis.
Exactly. And so all of those little things, if you can imagine like that pie chart, have its own little sliver, and those are all going to lead up to the point where your body and your brain just can't take the feeling of it anymore, and it's just going to let go. And points on that too is where it's not always perfectly physical, which is really cool. That's why I think one of the side benefits of like blood flow restriction training and cuff training is it just gets you heinously pumped in like a safe environment. And so your brain has more time with it. And psychologically, you're more able to tolerate that. That's even like me back here in the spray wall today. I was supposed to be outside, but I have no friends. So I'm out here trying to just like slightly simulate the feelings. So instead of being super tactical about I'm going to do 35 moves and then I want 34 moves, I'm going to take 10% off and that's my endurance day. I'm here just like climbing a little bit, baby rest, climbing a little bit, baby rest. I want to feel the pain in my skin. I want to feel getting 30 moves in and then visualizing that I'm halfway up the crux and I'm having those little mental battles like, oh, you're going to fall off. You're not good enough right now. Like, no, you fight through. And so all those little things can go through. And this has been shown with people who like to work out with music. You can lift more and you can run further. Like there's this way to emotionally fight back, and it allows you to work a little harder. So those are some like really cool things that come into play when it comes to the reason we fall off or the reason we fail. But really, I think the most fundamental thing, because I was getting back to that breathing aspect, is how do we decompress the fire hose to let more water in? And one of the ways we can know that we're getting good is that breathing will actually come down to more of a relaxing breath. Because to get more oxygen and blood flow to the area, heart rate must go up, aka more blood, but we also need to supply that blood with oxygen. Where does that come from? The air we breathe. So we have to increase the rate of breathing in order to catch up with that. At least your brain thinks you do, and so it will. And so a nice way to slightly know, better than wearing some crazy technology while you're climbing all the time, is when I'm down there and I feel like my skin isn't twice the size of what it is, my breathing is slow and it's a slow rate. I, aside from funny noses and deviated septums, have a really easy nasal breathing ability. That's a more or less really good sign that says you're back to it. If your heart rate's high and you're mouth breathing and you have anxiety and you're breathing really quickly and you're feeling bad, that would be the worst case scenario. So the opposite of all those is a good sign on the wall that you have recovered.
Gotcha. That's super interesting. I just recently did my first 513 in a bunch of years, and I think it's like a pretty power endurance-y route, and I found that every time I got through the bottom section, I was like mouth breathing all the way to the top. Like there was a rest halfway up. I've even heard people say that it's a good rest, and that if not for that good rest, it would be way harder. And I don't know. I never found the good rest, but I could slow down my breathing a little bit and start to get more control of it. I also think from a psychological point of view, I get a lot of value out of like hearing myself breathing hard, especially when I'm about to leave the rest. I think that's a good psychological signal to me that I'm going to try hard. But that's something I'll keep in mind, is like paying attention to, can I get back down to nose breathing at this rest? Because that would be probably a sign that it was a pretty good rest. there's two more things I want to talk about, and maybe before we get to go full in on the psychological side of things, I want to answer this question a little bit more concretely. Why do you think I've experienced this too? So I think it's true, and maybe I'll throw my guess out. But he asked, why does it get better? Why do you depump and then it starts to get worse? And my guess is that has to do with the multiple different energy systems. And the idea is if you're at a rest that is like better than the holds you were climbing on, like it's a jug or something, but the wall is still steep, like you don't have zero oxygen demand, right? So maybe you can depump for a second, but if the rest is not good enough for you to really get into the most efficient energy systems, then once you kind of utilize the oxygen that's easy to get to, the baseline is not low enough, and so you're eventually going to start tapering back off. Am I like sort of on the right track there?
Yeah. So just to clarify for me, so he means like when you start resting to the end of the rest, like the beginning of the rest is over. You
leave the ground, you do a boulder problem, you're trying hard, you're adrenalized, you're pumped, you get to a jug, and if you stay at that jug for 4, 6, 8, 10 shakes, it kind of starts to feel better. But if you just keep staying at the jug, you've like hit your high point and it actually starts to get worse again. And I've had this experience too.
I think in my head, like a visual, this would probably be a good like Instagram carousel style thing where you have like a horse race and you have 3 horses. And, one of them is the easy, middle, and hard energy system. And they're all racing to the finish, which is down. And when you get tired. And so when you're on there, initially when it feels good, you get to speak to one of them. But the other versions of it are still going and they're catching up. And so time is unfortunately probably helping you with one, but allowing the others to kind of catch up, pending the grip type, the intensity relatively to you, your skin, your pain tolerance, the psychological part. Are you handling your breathing? Because a lot of those things will help expedite or slow down any one of those. And one of the cool ones is like the breathing is really, really cool. And it makes me think back to, I think it's Daniel Woods. Did he FA the process? Or it was a video about him doing the process. Yeah. And so there's a cool section in that video where he talks about going into some breathing and he reads a book and he actually mapped out 4 sections of the process and when he was going to switch the way he breathed, which is really cool because he like was chill and then the crazy crux to the lip, he was like, I'm going to mouth breathe and get super psyched up. But then when I get to the scary slab, I need to calm down because I can't blow it. And those are really cool parts because you mentioned that point where I said the breathing is good to bring you back down the recovery in a certain way, but you want the opposite. If you want to get psyched up and you got to like absolutely full crimp this thing and throw your fist in there and maybe break an arm, you got to get psyched up. If you go into that all like woo, 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 like you're not going to do it. So there is multiple utilities of the way we breathe. And I think that was a really cool video and a really cool sciencey way of him doing that rather than just relying on finger strength or something like that. And so I think it just is a evidence and a consequence of the complexity of all the things that are going on, trying to push you off the wall, where for a few seconds you feel great, but if you hang out there for a minute, eventually it's not going to feel great anymore.
Yeah. I think it's important to understand that like even though we can't literally train the energy systems. I mean, there was like a phase maybe 5 years ago or something where the climbing community got obsessed with the different energy systems. And like you can't literally train one of them. Your body's always using all of them in some combination while you're climbing. Otherwise, you probably would just fall off the wall. But different people do have different genetic predispositions for the different energy systems. And I think different people kind of, not accidentally is not the right word, but different people get better at different types of energy just because of the way that they climb. So one memory I have is climbing a route at Viento that's like, pretty overhanging. It's probably a 60-foot route. It's not super long, but it's very steep and it gets steeper at the top. Like the last 2 bolts are the steepest part. And right before the boulder problem, at the very top, there's like a jug basically, but it's like, 50 or 60 degrees overhanging there. And you just climbed, 40 feet of like 512 plus or whatever. And my friend was like watching me. I got to that jug on red point, and I pretty much like hit the jug, chalk up both my hands, tried the boulder, and I fell. And like, how come you didn't hang out at that rest? And at the time, it just, in my head, I was just like, well, he's just a way better climber than me. But then I was thinking about it, and actually, there's other hard moves and hard sections there where he couldn't power through those sections as well as I could. I think because my shorter, faster, less efficient energy systems were more well developed than his. But if he could just get to that jug, if he could just get to that rest, even though the oxygen demand at that rest was too much for me because you're just a little bit on your body and on your hands still because it's so steep, if he could get there, he'd be able to recover to a higher degree than me. But I could get there more easily than him. I just wasn't able to actually recover when I got there. And it's like I could go down the rabbit hole of trying to train that energy system. That's probably something I should invest in if I was going to do more sport climbing. But what I wound up doing was just getting efficient enough through the rest of the route that I didn't need to rest at that rest, and I could just chalk up my hands and do the next boulder. And I think that's the key takeaway to the first part of this question is like, you got to know what your natural advantages are and what you're good at. So final little tidbit, because we've done a little mini podcast on this question.
It's great. Love it.
I think that we've kind of danced around the psychology, and I think that piece is really important too, because something that happens with getting to rests is that you have a lot of adrenaline. Like it's not all your heart rate and the sensation of difficulty is not all physical, right? There's a lot of stuff going on when you're rock climbing that is not purely what's going on in your forearms at a cellular level. Like you're psyched. Maybe it's your first time getting to this rest from the ground and you're just like, you don't know what's going to happen. So you have all the like uncertainty. Maybe it's your 50th time getting to this rest from the ground and you're fucking over it in the red pointing process. Like there's a lot more going on than just what's physically happening. So one thing that I'm curious about, Collin, is when I get to the rest and my heart rate is like, my heart's pounding, I think there's a popular idea that you want to relax and like let your heart rate come down, and that's part of the point of resting. But from the point of view of like wanting to oxygenate my muscles, isn't it sort of a good thing that my heart is beating really fast? And like, how much of that is the adrenaline or psychological? Like, do we want to try to reduce our heart rate? Do we want to try to reduce that psychological intensity? Or is that maybe actually a bad thing? What do you think?
Good perspective from it. I think the physiological side of things would say that the heart rate is going to beat really high because it's trying to send more fluid in the area that it thinks it needs to. The issue is like the thing has become a bottleneck. It's not allowing anything happening anyway. So we need to do things that slowly open that. And I think the heart rate will naturally come down and let you know that like an equilibrium-ish has occurred. Thus, the heart rate came down. And that's the reason we want to look for a low heart rate is saying like, oh, constriction is slowly opening up now because my heart doesn't need to pump any faster. What I'd be curious about too, I've heard this somewhere, and I don't want to be like a big old podcast statistic guy, like, did you know? But there was something about fear and anxiety and the reduction of like a double-digit % reduction in some endurance performance metric in some sport. And so that would say I want the heart rate to come down because that would let me know the physiology, blood flow, energy should be getting back into my favor. But maybe I do want to expedite the process as well because whatever from the anxiety, psychological fear side of things might be negative influencing me simultaneously. So not only is my oxygen not there, my calcium ion accumulation bad, and my acidosis but maybe there's something else happening there too that's who knows. So interesting scenario. It'll be kind of fun to see. In my head, I start to visualize if we had like a huge budget for YouTube, that'd be a fun thing to like do you climbing and like the percentages of your things as they're changing. You get to a rest and watch them come back, but then something else is coming in and out. Or maybe more simply just the pie graph of what people think you fall off the wall, or the reason is you fall off the wall, and then switch over to the next slide and like what actually is happening. And it's just like 37 different things. And so for that reason, as coaches, we come to the dilemma of you need to really understand all of that to have good whys and good reasoning for your coaching and whatnot. But then how do we make it practical and simple for people? Because to understand all 132 pathways of falling off, we're all going to die by the time we do that and forget to climb. So, what's the middle ground when it comes to that kind of stuff? But to come back to that without getting too far, I think you do want the heart rate to come down, because that should show you that you are trending towards successful on recovering for whatever amount of recovery is possible. And B, we have to be at least aware that if we are letting our thoughts get out of control and we are trending towards fearful and psychologically anxious, it probably will be negatively influencing us, not even on the commitment, execution, and accuracy side of things, but also potentially like physically and physiologically as well, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kind of that it's you mentioned it from a coaching angle, but also from a climbing angle. Like we like to tease these things apart when we're talking about them, but while you're actually climbing, it doesn't really matter if it's psychological or physical. Like they're all tied together during the experience, and maybe if you can figure out which thing is limiting you more, it's a little bit easier to take steps to alleviate it. But your forearms don't actually care whether it's quote real or not real. So
right.
Yeah, you got to feel it, I think, in the end, and that's the answer to so many of the most important questions that I've answered on the AMA. But I think in this case, it is a good answer.
Yeah, it could lead to like good, you know how like thorough your surveys and your Q&A questions are, where like someone has finger strength and they're like a 2.0 body weight and they have a critical force and it's off the charts and blah, 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 blah. But they have these feelings and these thoughts and these observations while they're climbing. It would at least say like, hey, we don't have to really worry about the physical. Let's dive into more of like what's going on there. Like when you get here, what are the thoughts going through your head? When you get here, what are you doing? What are you saying? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? And then diving into that. I always think back to baseball, and one of my best turning moments in playing baseball was when I got into sports psychology really thoroughly, and I wish I would have continued it as consistently as my dumbbell lifting. But I got to the point with learning these little tactful things, like taking whatever bad things were, and you do these little physical mantras like I spit the bat into my hand, I catch it, I throw it away, right? And these little things helpful. Or before you go on to the climb, quickly recall the 3 to 5 things that you were most successful at recently, like ascend, working hard, this and that. Say those things and then get onto the climb. Or one of my biggest ones was rewriting the principle of confidence, where I think, especially this is super true in baseball and even more true in climbing, if we were basing our confidence 100% off success, no climber would be confident. But then how do we have confident climbers? And so we kind of have to rewrite the map on confidence. And so from the baseball side, I learned it taught me to base my confidence on my work ethic and my quality at-bats, or my quality efforts, my quality sessions. Because I don't have to send to have a quality session. But for me, I will take that and I'll put it in my confidence cookie jar. And so when I go to my red point center outside, I'm 100% confident, even though I'm going to fall 1,000 times, because my confidence is based off something different than success. Because if it was really any sport ever, like there's no sport I can't think of that would not have some level of failure that would make someone very, very little confident if they only did off their successes. So, long story short, before I get off my soapbox there, I think little things like that are really helpful.
That was gold. I can't believe I brought you on to talk about forearm physiology and you dropped gold. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on and helping to answer the question, and I appreciate the extra tidbits there that you dropped at the end. I'll have to have you on for a proper episode sometime soon.
Anytime. Yeah, we almost got there anyway because we're over. So.
Cool. Thanks, Collin.
I appreciate it. Thank you, man.
Okay, everybody. That is it for the August 2025 Ask Me Anything episode. Thanks for putting in your questions. Good questions again this month. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you next time.